The death penalty is a pretty controversial subject today, at least in the United States where I live. But regardless of your opinion on the legalities of capital punishment, I think most of us can agree that we don't want someone executed if they're actually innocent. Unfortunately, this is something that does happen. This is the story of a man who was convicted of and sentenced to death for a triple murder that he may or may not have actually committed. This is the story of Cameron Todd Willingham. Cameron Todd Willingham was born on January 9th, 1968 in Ardmore, Oklahoma. His parents divorced when he was a baby, and his mother effectively abandoned him. He wouldn't reconnect with her until he was an adult. When he was 13 months old, his father, who had already remarried, took custody of him, and he was raised by his father and stepmother. Different sources said different things about what name Cameron Todd Willingham went by. Some said that his family and friends referred to him as Cameron, but most called him Todd. So I will be calling him Todd for the rest of this video just for the sake of clarity. As a teenager, Todd got into the habit of sniffing paint. According to his father and several other family members, this paint sniffing drastically changed his personality, affected his judgment, and may have at least contributed to his later committing crimes. In fact, his stepmother would say he was usually high when he committed crimes. Todd dropped out of school in the 10th grade. I couldn't find any records of him actually committing crimes as a juvenile. I'm pretty sure they happened, but the records were later expunged. The earliest I could find was from 1986, when he would have been about 18. He was arrested for assault with a deadly weapon and carrying a concealed weapon. He was arrested 3 more times that year. Once for burglary, once on 6 counts of auto burglary, and once on contributing to the delinquency of a minor. This last charge stemmed from him selling paint to a minor, and another arrest for the same thing followed in January of 1987. From April 1987 to September 1988, Todd was arrested 5 more times for things like grand larceny, theft, and DUI. According to one report, he also stole a dog and killed it by beating it with a stick and running over it with a car. He was also known for paint sniffing as well as selling paint and beer to minors. In 1988, Todd met Stacy Kirkendall, who was a senior in high school at the time. It's not clear exactly when their relationship became romantic, but it happened pretty quickly. On August 21st, 1989, about a year after they'd met, Stacy gave birth to the couple's first child, a daughter named Amber. On December 18th, 1990, she gave birth again, this time to twin girls, Carmen and Cameron. Todd would later say that fatherhood made him want to settle down and not get into trouble anymore, but his legal problems continued. Between February 1989 and September 1991, he was arrested 5 more times. These arrests were mostly for theft, but one was for making a terroristic threat. He had tried to run Stacy's aunt off the road with his car and had threatened 2 of her other family members. In August 1991, police were called to his house, where they found him in his front yard screaming at Stacy, calling her a whore, a bitch, and a slut. She later denied this incident. Todd Henry Bailey, Todd's neighbor who had claimed he had killed a dog, also recalled a later incident where Stacy came to his house and asked to use his phone to call for help because Todd was threatening her. If you couldn't tell from these last 2 incidents, Todd and Stacy's relationship was volatile. They frequently broke up and got back together, and multiple witnesses said Todd was abusive. One report says he tried to kick Stacy in the stomach when she was pregnant with the twins to cause her to miscarry. She later denied this and said that he had never hurt their children. She also later said that her doctor never found any indication that she had been abused while she was pregnant. Rumors swirled that Todd was unfaithful, but Stacy only admitted to one other girlfriend, and that was actually while she and Todd were broken up. According to her, she went by Todd's apartment and saw his new girlfriend's car outside, so she scratched the paint on it. At the time, Todd was actually at Stacy's house watching the kids. Other witnesses would later claim that Todd wasn't really much of a father. He never tried to comfort his children when they were upset and wasn't really around much anyway. At some point in his on-again, off-again relationship with Stacy, they moved to the small town of Corsicana, Texas, about 55 miles south of Dallas. Stacy had family there and they wanted to be closer to them. Despite all of their troubles, the couple married in October 1991. There's conflicting information on exactly when the move to Corsicana happened. In a police interview on New Year's Eve of that year, which we'll get to more later, Todd said they'd been in the house for about a year and a half, which would have put them there in the summer of 1990. But Todd's father would later say he didn't move in with Stacy until they actually got married in October 1991. I'm not really sure what happened there. Nevertheless, by the Christmas season of 1991, the Willinghams had settled into their home in Corsicana. But unfortunately, this family life wouldn't last. In December 1991, the Willinghams were still holding things together. 22-year-old Stacy worked in her brother's bar, while 23-year-old Todd had worked several different jobs before recently being laid off from his job as an auto mechanic. The couple was about 2 months behind on their rent and had stopped paying some of their bills to afford Christmas presents for 2-year-old Amber and 1-year-old Carmen and Cameron. On the morning of December 23rd, according to Todd, he woke up just after 9 a.m. This was also around the time Stacy was leaving the house to go pay bills, at least the ones they were still paying, and to buy Christmas presents. Todd heard the twins crying, so he gave them bottles, put them on the floor of the children's bedroom, and set up the child-proof gate in the doorway. Then he went back to sleep. Another source said Stacy actually put the twins on the floor earlier in the morning, and Todd simply gave them bottles and left them on the floor. He woke up about an hour later when he thought he heard Amber calling for him. The house was filled with smoke. He went to the children's bedroom but couldn't find them. In fact, according to one report, the air was so thick with smoke, he actually mistook a doll for one of the children. He said he stayed in that room for 2 to 3 minutes, but escaped when debris began falling from the ceiling. After escaping the house via the nearby front door, it was too hot for him to go back inside. Around 10 a.m., 11-year-old Buffy Barber was playing outside with her sister when she smelled smoke. At first, she thought it was coming from the house of Sheila, her next-door neighbor. She ran back inside and told her mother that Sheila's house was on fire. Diane Barber ran outside with her daughter, where they heard Todd screaming, "My babies are inside burning up. Help me." Buffy told him to go back inside the house and get his children, but he just stood there. She did claim to see him break a window on the front porch. Just a note about the Barbers, a lot of sources listed them as Barbie, but the trial transcripts give their last name as Barber, so that's what I will be calling them. Diane Barber went back to her home to call for help, but her phone wasn't working, so she ran to a neighbor's house and called 911. After she left, Todd broke 2 of the bedroom windows open with a pool cue, but flames only poured from the open space. Fire trucks arrived on the scene around 10:26 a.m. Todd was so hysterical and wanting to go back into the house, he had to be physically restrained. Firefighters found Amber in the master bedroom. At the time, it was unclear if she was alive or dead. The twins' bodies were found on their bedroom floor after the fire was extinguished. The firefighter who found them said they were burned beyond any possible survival. They were pronounced dead at the scene. Amber was rushed to nearby Navarro Regional Hospital. Her heart wasn't working and she wasn't breathing. Doctors attempted to resuscitate her, but she never exhibited any vital signs. About 15 minutes after her arrival, she was pronounced dead. The Corsicana Fire Department began looking into the fire immediately after it was extinguished. It didn't take long for them to become suspicious. They searched the house for electrical problems or anything else that could have caused an accidental fire, but found nothing. They also had the gas company come into the house and look for a possible gas leak, but they also found nothing. A sample that they took from the house and sent to a lab for testing had charcoal lighter fluid, which they believe could have been used as an accelerant. Deputy State Fire Marshal Manuel Vasquez noted pour patterns on the floor that indicated liquid that had taken a while to sink in. According to Vasquez, if a liquid had been put on the floor accidentally, such as a drink that someone spilled, it should have been cleaned up right away. The liquid in the Willingham house had soaked underneath the floorboards, supposedly because it hadn't been cleaned up and therefore had been poured intentionally, such as with an accelerant. Vasquez also believed that areas with more damage indicated where the accelerant had actually been poured. There were other signs that they found as well. Metal springs from the children's bed were white, which indicated severe heat. There were also burn marks on the floor in the children's room that indicated a liquid accelerant. Investigators also noted web-like cracks through the glass, something that's often known as crazed glass. This was thought at the time to be a clear indicator of arson. Overall, they claimed to find about 20 indicators of arson. There are a couple of other noteworthy things in the house. There was a grill on the front porch around where the liquid accelerant was thought to have been poured. The grill has been cited many times as a possible reason why the fire spread so fast. But there was actually a gap between the concrete porch where the liquid accelerant was found and the wood threshold where the grill apparently was. So the liquid couldn't have flowed there. Another thing that struck investigators as off was a refrigerator blocking the back door, seemingly preventing anyone from escaping that way. On Christmas Eve, the day after the fire, autopsies were conducted on Amber, Carmen, and Cameron. Their cause of death was determined to be carbon monoxide poisoning as a result of smoke inhalation. Based on information from Manuel Vasquez's office, their deaths were listed as homicide. But forensics weren't the only indicator that something was off. Todd's neighbors who witnessed the fire said he seemed overly concerned with his car and even moved it out of the way at some point, seemingly so it wouldn't get damaged. After the fire, Todd was checked into the hospital and stayed overnight. When Stacy got the news and later arrived at the hospital, she asked Todd point blank why their children hadn't survived, but he had. He had nothing to say. Sometime between 2:30 and 3 on the afternoon of the 23rd, Buffy Barber's sister, Brandy, went to the hospital with her friend Stephanie to visit Todd. Stephanie suggested asking Todd if he wanted anything to eat, which he did. So they went to Jack in the Box and got food and brought it back to him. But Brandy remembered being surprised that someone who had just been through what Todd had would be that concerned about food. Another source said Todd was overheard at the hospital asking a friend of his to go to Whataburger and get him food. A nurse at the hospital said that she saw a woman, presumably Stacy, in Todd's room, and that Todd was irritated because the woman didn't want to go right up to the bed. The nurse thought this was unusual behavior for someone who had just lost his children. Around 6 p.m. on the night of the fire, Todd and Stacy talked to news reporters. Diane Barber was there as the cameras filmed the couple, and she claims to have overheard Todd tell Stacy that he'd gone back into the house, even though she didn't actually see him do that. She would later say she didn't think Todd did enough to rescue his children. A policeman who also witnessed the interview said Todd was a lot calmer than he had been earlier. Another report said Todd was partying at a bar immediately after the fire. He was still in the hospital overnight, so this might have happened the next day, Christmas Eve. A community collection taken up by Corsicana residents for funeral costs was reportedly spent on boots and darts. On Christmas Eve morning, their neighbor Todd Henry Bailey said he saw Todd and Stacy at the scene of the fire cleaning up debris. According to him, the couple was laughing and cutting up, not behavior he expected from people who had just lost all of their children as well as their house. After the police arrived later on, Bailey said, the couple suddenly became somber. A police chaplain would say that Todd also appeared too distraught, as if he was putting on a show. Around noon on December 27th, Manuel Vasquez arrived at the scene of the fire to help the fire marshal make a sketch of the house. It was here that he also noted the heater in the children's room was switched to the off position, seemingly ruling out the possibility that the fire was started accidentally by that heater. When Todd arrived at the scene later on that day, a firefighter said that he seemed unusually upset about a dartboard that had been damaged in the fire. At the funeral held for his daughters, I believe on the same day, witnesses said they overheard Todd whispering, "You are not the one who was supposed to die," over Amber's coffin. Corsicana Fire Department Sergeant Jimmy Hensley also claimed Todd had told people he didn't want his children. And in addition to all of this, parts of Todd's story just weren't adding up. For starters, his injuries from all accounts were relatively minor. He had first-degree burns on his face and neck, a second-degree burn on his shoulder, singed hair, and blisters. Just a reminder, an example of a first-degree burn would be a sunburn, so first-degree burns aren't really that severe at all. He showed no signs of smoke inhalation at the hospital, and his carbon monoxide level was about normal for someone who smoked or lived with a smoker, and Todd and Stacy both smoked. And his story of escaping the fire had holes in it. Since Amber's body was found in the master bedroom, I think it's safe to assume that Todd's original account of her running into the master bedroom is accurate. According to Todd, he then told Amber to get out of the house. This struck Jimmy Hensley as strange because, as he put it, if he couldn't see where to go, how is his 2-year-old going to find a way out? He also found it weird that Todd would just leave Amber in the master bedroom if they were already together and could escape together. Maybe he wanted to go back and get the twins, but leaving a 2-year-old to fend for themselves in a house fire is strange. Yet another version of Todd's story said he never even realized Amber was in his room, which completely contradicts everything else he had said. Todd initially said he escaped out the front door, then later said he escaped out the back door. He also told police he'd gone to the kitchen first, when he originally said he'd gone to the children's bedroom first. According to Vasquez, Todd couldn't have been in the master bedroom at the start of the fire because he would have sustained more injuries. It was also impossible for him to have been in the children's room as long as he claimed, 2 to 3 minutes, for the same reason. When he escaped from the children's bedroom to the hallway and out the front door, he also should have sustained more injuries to his feet due to the extreme heat of the floor and the fact that he was barefoot, but his feet weren't injured at all. Overall, Todd's injuries just didn't appear consistent with escaping a fire of this magnitude. Todd was interviewed on New Year's Eve by Jimmy Hensley. Todd seemed to think at this point that the fire was electrical. Their microwave had blown up about 3 weeks before the fire, and he said they could still smell wiring from loose wires and hear popping. He also mentioned squirrels in the attic. But Jimmy Hensley wasn't buying it. He thought Todd's tone sounded more like bragging than remorse or sadness. As he later said, "Just his whole demeanor to me looks like he just wanted to tell a story." Hensley showed Todd pictures of his daughter's bodies, hoping that this would cause him to break down and make a confession. Todd did start crying after he saw the pictures, but it didn't last long and he never confessed to anything. The physical evidence, Todd's actions, and his contradictory statements led Jimmy Hensley to believe that the fire was arson. As he would put it, "After a while in this business, you get to judge people by their actions and their looks. From the very time I sat and talked to him, I just knew he wasn't being honest with me." On the night of January 8th, 1992, about 2 weeks after the fire, Todd and Stacy were in a car when a SWAT team pulled them over. Todd was arrested and charged with murder. After his arrest, he stopped cooperating with authorities. Todd's trial was set for August 1992. On August 3rd, a pretrial hearing was held. Stacy and 2 of her brothers wanted a change of venue. They didn't believe Todd could get a fair trial in Navarro County because of the media coverage. Their request was denied. Before the trial, Todd was offered a deal: plead guilty and he'd get life in prison rather than face a possible death sentence. He turned it down because he didn't want to plead guilty to a crime he said he didn't commit. His trial began on August 18, 1992. The prosecution claimed Todd poured a combustible liquid on the floor in the children's rooms, hallway, and entrance around mid-morning, then started the fire with the intent of killing the children. Around the time of the trial, the district attorney of Navarro County at the time had told reporters he thought Todd killed his children because they got in the way of his beer drinking and dart playing. Prosecuting attorney John Jackson was actually against the death penalty, but eventually decided he would make an exception in Todd's case because it was an especially brutal triple murder. Forensic evidence took up a big chunk of the prosecution witnesses' testimonies. A few things mentioned were multiple points of origin, intense heat, and attempts to debunk the theory that the fire was accidental. The prosecution also called on another inmate, 22-year-old Johnny Webb. He claimed he overheard Todd confess to setting the fire to cover up an accidental injury to one of the children at Stacy's hands. The defense called very few witnesses, 2, maybe 3. Todd didn't take the stand because his lawyers didn't think he'd make a good witness, and he didn't feel like he needed to. The case went to the jury after just 2 days, and they were out for about an hour before returning with the verdict. Cameron Todd Willingham had been found guilty of capital murder. The next day, August 21st, he was sentenced to death. Just another quick note about the trial. Todd's attorney at the time, David Martin, believed and still believes to this day that Todd is guilty. A lot of people have pointed this out, but I honestly don't think it means a great deal. Most defense lawyers work with clients that they think are guilty. Like most prisoners, especially those facing life sentences or death, Todd did everything he could to get out. While on death row, he wrote to numerous different legal groups, asking if they could give him a polygraph to clear his name. Another earlier report had claimed Todd refused a polygraph at the start of the investigation. While in prison, he met a woman named Elizabeth Gilbert via a prison pen pal program. When Elizabeth initially met with Todd, she just assumed he was guilty. But after looking through the case files, she changed her mind and ended up working in an attempt to get him exonerated and freed. But this was an uphill battle. Todd exhausted all of his appeals, and in 2002, a writ was denied in a federal court. The case was brought in front of the U.S. Supreme Court in 2003, but they declined to hear it. Shortly after this denial, Todd's execution was scheduled for February 17, 2004. But there was one last 11th hour attempt to save him. Shortly before Todd's scheduled execution, his appellate lawyer, Walter Reeves, contacted a man named Gerald Hurst. Hurst is a chemist and fire expert. Interestingly, he also invented the Mylar balloon that you often see in grocery stores and buy when someone graduates or has had a baby. Hurst took one look at Todd Willingham's case files and concluded pretty quickly that it was a bogus arson case. He claimed there was not one iota of evidence that the fire was arson, and much of what they considered to be evidence is not evidence at all. I'm going to get a bit more into that evidence later, but one thing that Hurst cited was the Lime Street fire. On October 15, 1990, a house on Lime Street in Jacksonville, Florida, caught fire. Firefighters found 35-year-old Gerald Wayne Lewis outside the house holding his young son, but 6 other people in the house, including Lewis's pregnant wife, had all died. Lewis was charged with murder, but the actual evidence of arson was slim, so prosecutors conducted an experiment. Flashover is very loosely defined as the point in a fire where everything in a room catches on fire. At the time of the Lime Street fire, it was believed that flashover took around 15 to 20 minutes to occur after a fire was set. The prosecution assembled a team of arson experts who went to an abandoned house in the same neighborhood as the house that had burned. One source said it was next door, another said that it was 2 doors down. They spent several $1,000s reconstructing the house to give it a similar layout and furniture as the house that had burned. The team set a fire on the couch and watched it burn, thinking that the room would reach flashover in about 15 to 20 minutes. Instead, it took just 4. This threw a huge wrench in the prosecution's case. Because flashover was thought to initially take a decent amount of time, they thought the victim should have had plenty of time to escape the fire if it truly had been accidental. This made it more likely that Lewis had killed his victims before the fire, or had at least done something to prevent them from escaping. But since it took less than 5 minutes for the fire to cover an entire room, it was possible the victims really couldn't escape in time, and therefore that the fire was accidental. In addition to this, the victims had CO2 levels consistent with a rapidly spreading fire. The case never went to trial, and Gerald Wayne Lewis was cleared of all charges. This experiment was conducted in early 1991, months before the Willingham house fire. By the time of the trial, Hearst realized these findings should have been common knowledge among fire investigators. Hearst only had a few days to finish his report. Some sources said he had only 48 hours, but he did manage to finish it in time. This report, along with a petition, was submitted to Texas's Court of Criminal Appeals, as well as then Governor Rick Perry, 4 days before the scheduled execution. They weren't hoping for a full pardon, just a temporary stay of execution, but even that was denied. Todd reportedly found out that his final attempt had failed just hours before his scheduled execution. Right before his execution, Todd had one final visit with his father and stepmother. He confessed that in the ordeal, he had lied about one thing. He never went into the children's. He said he lied because he didn't want people to think he was a coward. Before his execution, Todd once again proclaimed his innocence and hurled profanities at his now ex-wife Stacy, saying he hoped she would rot in hell. Around 6 p.m. on February 17, 2004, he was executed via lethal injection. His body was cremated, and some of his ashes were spread over his children's graves. In 2006, the Innocence Project submitted a report to the newly formed Texas Forensic Science Commission. This 9-person committee had been founded in 2005 to investigate allegations of professional negligence or professional misconduct that would substantially affect the integrity of the results of a forensic analysis conducted by an accredited laboratory. The Innocence Project's report eventually led to the commission hiring Craig Byler to investigate the Willingham fire further. Byler's report was completed in 2009 and covered both the cases of Cameron Todd Willingham and another convicted arsonist, Ernest Ray Willis. Willis was convicted in 1987 of setting a fire that had killed 2 people the previous year. This was also in Texas. He was sentenced to death, but was released in October 2004 after a judge concluded there was no evidence he actually set the fire. Byler's report stated that fire science was actually a relatively new thing. In the 1980s and before, fire science and investigation was an art based solely upon personal experience and the associated folklore. NFPA 921, Guide for Fire and Explosion Investigations, was published by the National Fire Protection Association on February 10, 1992, months before Todd Willingham's trial. Byler's report also blasted Manuel Vasquez's findings as nothing more than a collection of personal beliefs that have nothing to do with science-based fire investigation. However, he did acknowledge that the information in these standards, while published in 1992, weren't really widely known or implemented until the mid-1990s. This report also debunked a great deal of the forensic science used by the original investigators. I will get more into that later. The Corsicana Fire Department released a 21-page rebuttal of the report, standing by their findings. The report was completed on August 17, 2009, and set to be presented to the Texas Forensic Science Commission in October. But just 2 days before the scheduled hearing, Governor Rick Perry replaced 4 of the commission's 9 members. Some sources said he replaced 3. At least one of them had similar beliefs to Perry, both on the Willingham fire and, I believe, politics in general. The hearing was postponed indefinitely. Many people believe Rick Perry made this move to sabotage the investigation. Other people have said his decision not to spare Todd Willingham or give him any stays of execution was political. It would be difficult to get reelected in Texas if he appeared to be soft on a convicted criminal. Perry called his abrupt commission changes pretty normal protocol and stated, "If you've got a whole new investigation going forward, it makes a lot more sense to put the new people in now and let them start the full process, rather than bring people in there for a short period of time and then replace them. I think it makes a whole lot more sense to make a change now than to make a change later." A spokesperson for Perry said he still believed the original verdict was correct. Later that month, Perry said the new commission members would move forward with the investigation. In 2010, at their quarterly meeting, the commission acknowledged that flawed science was used in the investigation. They also said that Manuel Vasquez and Doug Fogg weren't guilty of misconduct, that they were simply doing what was standard protocol at the time. In September 2010, lawyers from the Innocence Project filed a request to exonerate Todd posthumously. The hearing was scheduled to begin on October 13th of that year, but was postponed by a day when Judge Charlie Baird was asked to recuse himself from the case. He was either asked this by Navarro County Prosecutor R. Lowell Thompson or by the Navarro County District Attorney, depending on which source you read. Baird was asked to recuse himself because he'd been on the Court of Criminal Appeals in 1995 and had voted to uphold Todd Willingham's death sentence. Because of this, it was believed he couldn't be impartial in this hearing. He refused to recuse himself, and the hearing continued the next day, October 14th. The hearing continued, but in December, the Third Court of Appeals ruled that he should have recused himself and that he abused his discretion when he failed to do so. I couldn't find anything about this hearing after this, so the ruling seemed to bring it to a halt. In April 2011, the Texas Forensic Science Commission released a report that said current fire investigation was outdated and recommended changes. Later that year, a ruling was issued that kept the commission from looking at evidence older than 2005, the year they were founded. The ruling was made by Texas's then Attorney General, Greg Abbott, who we'll talk a little more about later. In 2012, it was revealed that Charlie Baird had been prepared to order Todd Willingham's official exoneration. But because he was asked to recuse himself, bringing the ruling to a halt, the exoneration was never filed. So I've talked already about why Todd Willingham was initially met with suspicion and eventually arrested. There is his criminal history, inconsistencies with his story, and his odd behavior after the fire. But now I want to talk more in detail about why he might actually be innocent. First and foremost, Corsicana Fire Department Sergeant Jimmy Hensley admitted that when they first started investigating this fire, they didn't really know what they were doing. After the fire, he even went back to school and trained to become a certified arson investigator because the team realized that they needed one. As for the Willingham fire, Hensley said that he was learning as I was going. There was also some crime scene contamination, which, anecdotally speaking, I've seen pop up quite a bit in these high-profile cases. By the time Manuel Vasquez got to the scene a few days after the fire, firefighters had tried to clean up and put piles of things from the house outside along the walls, and they had used tools to scrape debris from the floor. So let's get into some of the forensic evidence. Since Todd Willingham was jailed and since he was executed, multiple fire experts have come forward and claimed the investigation was flawed. In Hearst's 2004 report, he noted that the investigators had initially claimed to find 20 indicators of arson, which almost never happens. Usually only 1 or 2 indicators are found. Another thing that experts have cited is pour patterns. Like I mentioned earlier, liquid that soaked into the floorboards was thought to have been put there intentionally, because if it had been spilled accidentally, it would have been cleaned up. So these pour patterns were thought to be a sign of a liquid accelerant being used. But these patterns can actually also be caused by flashover, which we talked about earlier. Multiple points of origin were also brought up. The idea is that whoever set the fire was pouring liquid accelerant in different areas so everything would burn. However, this isn't necessarily the case. Multiple points of origin can be caused by so-called drop-down burning and embers from the fire, as well as other flammable things like paper or other liquids. Another piece of evidence cited in the trial is the phenomenon known as crazed glass. This is what happens when a fire leaves web-like cracks in glass surrounding it, usually in windows. It was thought to be caused by unusually intense heat, but it's now known that this actually isn't the case. It can actually happen when hot glass is sprayed with water, such as when a fire hose is being sprayed to put a fire out. Intense heat was also thought to be an indicator of arson, such as the bed springs in the children's room turning white. But a really hot, intense fire can spring up, whether it was set accidentally or intentionally. In the trial, Manuel Vasquez also testified that wood can't burn hot enough to melt an aluminum threshold, which had happened in this fire. So he thought an accelerant had to have been used, but wood can actually burn that hot on its own. So obviously, Todd's defenders say that there's not enough evidence that this fire was arson, so it had to be an accident. And if this is true, what caused it? The most common theory I saw in my research is that one of the children, probably Amber, set the fire accidentally. Remember, Todd and Stacy were both smokers, and cigarette lighters are small enough that a child could easily get hold of one and possibly accidentally start a fire if they weren't being watched. The children's bedroom also used to be a living room, so there was still a space heater in there. All of the children were constantly warned to stay away from the heater, but Amber didn't always listen. She got in trouble on what I've gathered was a pretty regular basis for messing with the heater. A bottle of charcoal lighter fluid was also found in the house, something a young child could have conceivably opened and accidentally started a fire with. In his police interview on New Year's Eve, Todd also talked about sparks from his broken microwave, as well as squirrels in the attic. At the time, investigators thought he was simply trying to divert attention away from himself, since he already looked suspicious. But a lot of these fire experts have concluded in later years that the original investigators didn't do a good enough job of ruling out an accidental fire. I'm not really sure how thoroughly the faulty microwave was looked into. It seems to kind of be the original investigators' word against the word of these later fire experts. So I'm not sure how true their claim is that the investigators didn't do enough to rule out an accidental fire. So let's talk for a second about the squirrels in the attic. I know it sounds at face value like kind of a strange defense, but let me give a personal anecdote. A few years ago when I was in college and home for the Christmas break, a squirrel chewed through a power line in our backyard. The squirrel ended up frying itself in the process. All of our electronics and appliances that weren't on surge protectors were destroyed, or at least couldn't be used anymore. And we had to call the fire department just to make sure a fire wouldn't start. So squirrels can definitely cause electrical problems, even fires. However, in the case of the Willingham fire, this is unlikely. According to Todd, they had actually gotten rid of their squirrel problem 2 days before the fire. The squirrels were also thought to be in the attic, and the fire didn't start in the attic. One more thing I want to address is the main thing that I had trouble getting past, and that is the refrigerator blocking the back door. Remember, when the fire department arrived at the house, they found this refrigerator in front of the back door, seemingly blocking it. There were actually 2 refrigerators in that room, and the one that was in front of the door actually normally stood pretty close to it. Is it possible that it wasn't actually pushed there to block an escape route, but that it was already there or close by and somehow got moved in the ensuing chaos? So the last thing I want to talk about in the realm of possible accident is something I actually haven't seen anyone else address. The Willingham fire took place 2 days before Christmas, and like many families, they had a Christmas tree. I'm not sure if their tree was real or artificial, but the things I'm about to say could probably apply to both. Between 2013 and 2017, around 160 fires began due to Christmas trees, usually from faulty electrical problems with the lights or from a heat source too close to the tree. Between 2014 and 2016, there were over 100,000 so-called winter residential building fires. And a Christmas tree that catches on fire can engulf the room it's in within a minute. Is it possible that this fire was caused accidentally due to problems with the Christmas tree? In 2009, one of the jurors that sentenced Todd Willingham to death expressed doubts about the case. Not only was Dorinda Brokowski not sure that Todd Willingham was 100% guilty, but she was surprised she got on the jury in the first place. Her father was a fire marshal and knew Doug Fogg, who was the assistant fire chief at the time. He also testified in the trial. Brokowski was certain that this connection would excuse her from being a juror due to an obvious conflict of interest, but it didn't. So now let's talk about the other big indicator of Todd's guilt, his behavior. Much like in his hometown back in Oklahoma, he didn't have a great reputation in Corsicana, especially among the police. He clearly wasn't a very good guy, but was he a killer? One thing that's brought up quite a bit, both in this case and in a lot of other cases I've looked into, is seemingly odd behavior after a tragedy. People who are eventually arrested for murder are often seen after their victim's death appearing unusually happy, or at least calm or not that upset. But it's important to remember that everyone grieves in different ways, and people don't always behave how you'd expect them to behave. Maybe Todd playing darts after the fire and laughing at the scene were his ways of coping. And what about his statement, "You're not the one who was supposed to die," reportedly spoken over Amber's body? Did he really mean to kill his other 2 children but not her? Or could he have been lamenting the fact that his children died instead of him? And what about the car? Witnesses said Todd seemed way too eager to move his car away from the scene as he was outside waiting for his children to be rescued. Todd would later say that he moved the car because he was afraid it would explode and cause further harm to the children. Others in Todd's corner have noted discrepancies as well. Elizabeth Gilbert, Todd's prison pen pal, noted how odd it was that Diane Barber was so insistent that Todd never went back into the house after escaping. She left to call the fire department, and after that, she didn't see Todd again for a while. It is entirely possible that he went back in after she left, although he did later admit that he lied about going back in. Gerald Hurst also questioned investigators' claims that Todd would pour accelerant on the front porch, since there was a good chance he would be spotted. Hurst also didn't think it was that crazy that Todd's feet were injured despite being barefoot. According to him, the floor in the hallway wouldn't have actually been that hot until after flashover. Like I stated earlier, after his arrest, Todd completely stopped cooperating with authorities, including refusing to take a polygraph. This has been seen by some people as an indicator of his guilt, but is it? Polygraphs have a reputation for being unreliable at best. According to Psychology Today, polygraphs actually measure nervous excitement and operate on the premise that if a person is telling the truth, they will remain calm. But remember, people grieve and react to tragedies in very different ways. Is it possible that Todd was afraid of failing a polygraph, even if he was being truthful, simply because he couldn't be calm after the deaths of all 3 of his children? Or maybe because he was angry that he'd been arrested for a crime he didn't commit? It's also worth noting that after Todd was sentenced to death, he wrote to numerous advocacy groups, requesting that he be given a polygraph to clear his name. In 2009, just after Craig Byler's report was released, prosecuting attorney John Jackson was interviewed for a segment on Nightline on ABC. In his interview, Jackson noted the pattern that the liquid accelerant had supposedly been poured in on the floor. He believed that this pattern was a satanic symbol and that Todd worshipped Satan. It's not the first time that something like this had been brought up in Todd's case. Years earlier, at the scene of the fire, Manuel Vasquez had noted photos of skulls and posters for bands like Iron Maiden and Led Zeppelin on the walls. Todd's serpent and skull tattoo has also been mentioned. However, evidence like this is something that most people today don't believe is very substantial at all. So the next thing I want to address is Todd's lack of motive. What reason would he have to not only kill all of his children, but destroy his entire home as well? It wasn't insurance, at least not in the case of his children. The Willinghams didn't have life insurance policies on them at all. Stacy's father had policies on them, but the Willinghams didn't know about them. And even though they were able to cash them out after the children's deaths, they only paid out about $15,000. Todd also gave investigators express permission to search the house, something you would think a guilty person would at least be reluctant to do. When he testified at Todd's trial, Johnny Webb had claimed that Todd set the fire to cover up child abuse, but there was no evidence that the children were ever abused. Remember, when their autopsies were performed, no injuries were found on them except the ones from the fire. Just for my own speculation, and this is going to be really morbid, if you really wanted to kill someone, would a fire be the most practical way to do it? Anecdotally speaking, in most of the cases I've looked into where fire was involved, the culprit actually killed their victim or victims using some other method, then set the fire afterward in an attempt to cover up the evidence. Wouldn't strangulation or suffocation be easier, especially for 3 toddlers you could easily overpower? Another witness who testified for the prosecution in the so-called punishment phase of the trial was Dr. James Grigson. Grigson had been a witness in hundreds of death penalty trials, which earned him the nickname Dr. Death. But Grigson was also pretty controversial. He was reprimanded twice by the American Psychiatric Association, who eventually expelled him. He's also been accused of twisting facts of a case to fit the narrative of whoever first approached him with money. In 1981, the Supreme Court ruled that defendants in a trial couldn't be examined by a psychiatrist without their permission, and that information from these examinations couldn't be used in court unless the defendant was told about it beforehand. Grigson was actually part of the reason why this decision was made, as he often interviewed defendants without letting them know that what they said in these interviews would be used against them in trial. Another particularly interesting person in all of this is Todd's ex-wife, Stacy Kirkendall. Stacy divorced Todd within a year of his death sentence, but continued to support him for quite a while. At some point shortly before his execution, she changed her mind and became convinced that he was guilty, a position that, as far as I know, she still believes today. But exactly how she came to that conclusion is up for debate. According to Stacy's original story, she visited Todd right before he was executed, and he confessed to her, which led her to believe he was guilty. Later on, she said this actually wasn't true, and she had changed her mind after looking over the case files, as well as hearing his conflicting statements during prison visits. She also said she didn't know about Gerald Hurst's report when she became convinced of his guilt. In a statement from 2009, Stacy also changed her story about the days leading up to the fire. Stacy was also interviewed on New Year's Eve of 1991, I believe either right before or right after Todd. She told investigators her last fight with Todd had been about 2 weeks before the fire. But now, she said they'd had a fight the night before the fire. She claimed in this fight that she'd threatened divorce, and Todd said that she would never get custody of their children. And in an interview she gave a few months after Todd's execution, she never mentioned a confession. In October 2010, just before the hearing requested by the Innocence Project, Stacey held a press conference. In this press conference, she once again claimed that Todd had confessed to her before his execution, a claim she also upheld in a statement in 2012. Why her story has changed so much over the years isn't clear. In March 2000, Johnny Webb sent a motion to recant testimony to John Jackson, the original prosecutor. Todd Willingham's lawyer was never notified of this, and Johnny ended up recanting his recantation, so his original testimony from the trial still stood. In 2014, new evidence emerged that cast even more doubt on Todd Willingham's trial. Shortly before the trial began, John Jackson approached Johnny Webb, pressuring him to testify against Todd. Johnny was only supposed to be in prison for, I believe, 8 years, but Jackson threatened him with a life sentence if he didn't testify. He also said Johnny would get a reduced sentence from what he already had in exchange for his testimony. In 1996, Johnny Webb wrote a letter to John Jackson, reminding him of their original deal that he had already fulfilled his end of. Sure enough, Jackson pulled some strings and lessened the charges against Johnny. As a result, Johnny also became eligible for parole immediately. There was also a report that Johnny had received money from a local businessman who said he did this because Jackson asked him to. It was the resurfacing of Johnny's 1996 letter that brought all of this to light. Jackson denied all of this, but a formal investigation was launched. In April 2017, he went on trial for judicial misconduct, but was acquitted the following month. In 2012, Todd's stepmother and one of his cousins filed a petition with the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles to get Todd an official posthumous pardon. Another report from 2014 said that a posthumous pardon request was rejected, but this one was filed by the Innocence Project. I'm not sure if there were two separate requests for a pardon filed, or what became of the original one from 2012, if that's the case. Despite Rick Perry's earlier opposition, Todd's stepmother and cousin called on him to tell the board to investigate the case again. Perry left office in 2015, and the current Texas governor is Greg Abbott. If you don't remember, Abbott was Attorney General in 2011 when he ruled that the Texas Forensic Science Commission couldn't investigate any evidence older than 2005. Abbott is known to be a supporter of the death penalty, though he has pardoned at least one death row inmate. Texas and the death penalty have also been in the news a bit lately after Rodney Reed was granted a stay of execution. There's been a lot of speculation that Reed is actually not guilty of murdering 19-year-old Stacey Stites in 1996. It's not clear just how much influence Abbott actually had in the decision to grant Reed a stay of execution. In the years following Todd's execution, Jimmy Hensley still seems to believe he's guilty. He speculated that Todd set the fire to cover up another crime, such as the accidental killing of one of his children via discipline gone too far. I've also read reports that Stacey's family blames Todd for the children's deaths because he should have done more to rescue them. I've even seen speculation that said that Todd felt so guilty, he may have subconsciously felt that he deserved to die for failing to rescue the children. In a 2010 interview, Rick Perry said he thought it was unnecessary to issue stays of execution because he thought there was already a good process in place to determine guilt. As far as Todd Willingham, he brought up that 9 courts, including a Supreme Court on 4 separate occasions, as well as Stacey Kirkendall, had all looked at the case and determined guilt. He's also said previously that the idea that Todd was innocent is anti-death penalty propaganda. Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, who was Perry's rival for the Republican nomination for Texas governor in 2010, said Perry's decision wasn't a good one. She supports the death penalty and says most Texans do, but also said that most of them wanted to make sure the evidence clearly showed that a condemned prisoner was guilty. So before we go, I want to mention a few pieces of media on the case. There are several books on it, but one I want to highlight is Inferno, an inquiry into the Willingham fire. Author J. Bennett Allen explores the theory that Amber set the fire accidentally by playing with the space heater. It's a pretty quick read and it's free on Amazon, so I will leave a link below if you are interested. There's also a well-known documentary on the case, Incendiary, the Willingham Case. It actually shows a lot of the hearings and court proceedings I've talked about here. In addition, Trial by Fire, a dramatized movie of the case, was released earlier in 2019. And of course, I will leave links for those below as well. So that's about all I have for you today on the case of Cameron Todd Willingham. I know this was a pretty long video, and there's still a lot I had to leave out, mostly concerning the forensic evidence, just for the sake of time or clarity. If you are willing to go down the rabbit hole, I suggest you look into this case for yourself as well. And as always, I would love to know what you think in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and share it, and for more dark content, I hope you will consider subscribing and hitting the bell. I just posted my video about my 3,000 subscriber giveaway a few weeks ago, and in that time, I've actually reached 4,000 subscribers, which is kind of unreal. And I really appreciate everyone's support so far. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.